There are those who speak as if Starfield's success is largely dependent on how revolutionary the game is. These people speak as though Starfield has to invent a new genre, that it must tell a story and reveal gameplay mechanics that has never been seen before in the industry. Now, of course, these people won't just straight up say this, but it does seem to be the implication behind a lot of the verbiage that I'm seeing on social media. But is it fair? Let's discuss it. Some video games have been stamped with the label AAA, a marketing deception that is supposed to signify superiority over AA and indie games. But this doesn't necessarily mean that the games will be more fun. It simply means they're well funded and they tend to look more like movies. There are 6 elements that make AAA games seem different from one another: genre, setting, gameplay mechanics, animations, storyline, and story loops, which could lead to interesting side missions. Imagine making a movie or a video game set in a real-life universe about a protagonist who's a common-class citizen and just goes to work 5 days a week. Their life is typically uneventful, but one night they witness a crime they naturally weren't supposed to see, which leads to a mysterious group of people trying to hunt them down. They later realize that the people that are trying to find them are not only relentless but also well connected, because they always seem to know their location, which keeps them constantly on the run. While on the run, the protagonist ends up running through different environments such as the forest, various types of buildings, and parking garages. But wherever they go, the mysterious group that's hunting them always seems to be just a few steps behind them. But now imagine that same story playing out in a cyberpunk universe. Naturally, the enemies would be different. In a cyberpunk universe, it is possible that some of the enemies following the protagonist may not be human, and the ones that are would likely have augmentations that will give them abilities to do such things as running faster and hacking electronic devices. These two pieces of work can seem deceptively different because of their settings and different universes. One is set in a universe we're all familiar with, while the other is set in a cyberpunk universe, which could also place it in the category of science fiction. The two characters find themselves in the exact same circumstances, but in two completely different worlds. Nonetheless, the storylines are still the same. No matter what sort of surprises or twists and turns you add to the story, they more than likely have been used in previous projects. If the two projects are video games, one dev may decide to go with a game designed for quick-time events and cutscenes, while the other may decide to go with a gameplay style that requires the player to move the protagonist through the game manually, only using cutscenes to give the player's actions purpose. In terms of genre, both are dramas, but because one plays out in a cyberpunk universe, it could also fall into the category of sci-fi drama. The one thing they will have in common is this: experienced players will more than likely be familiar with any storylines or gameplay mechanics the developers decide to use for their projects. What will make the difference to the player is things such as the main story, story loops, character building, gameplay mechanics, and last but certainly not least, animations. Story loops in video games can often lead to side quests. Sometimes the side quest has nothing to do with the main story, and sometimes it does. When the side quest is related to the main story, the writer can loop the player back into the main story, reminding them of what their main objective is in the first place. When the side quest has nothing to do with the main story, a player can easily forget their main objective. For example, while playing Oblivion, I got so into side quests, I completely forgot I was supposed to assist in a mission to restore a new emperor to the throne. In most modern video games, narratives, stories, and plots are told by cutscenes. In video game development, the narrative is considered passive, while everything else in the game is considered active. The active part of the video game, of course, is where the player interacts with the game's world through gameplay. The gameplay will dictate what the player can and cannot do, but it is the cutscene that reveals the player's purpose for playing the game. The more complex the story, the more cutscenes may be added into the game in order to more explain the player's purpose. A great example of this is the video game Death Stranding. As much as people complained that it was nothing but a walking simulator, imagine if there was no story or cutscenes to give a purpose or explanation for all of that walking. Then you would have been simply walking without a purpose. While modern dev teams rarely invent new types of gameplay, they can get creative with the mechanics to put a spin on already existing gameplay ideas. A great example of this was Middle-earth: Shadow of War, a video game that was famous for its iron will mechanic that would allow the player to recruit their enemies to fight on their side. The gameplay feature was very popular, so popular in fact that it would have been very easy for a casual gamer to think the developers invented the idea. But this wasn't the case. Metal Gear Solid 5 had a feature where you could recruit enemies by taking them down non-lethally and ballooning them back to your base. The game, Shin Megami Tensei, released in 1992, also had a process by which a player could coax an enemy into fighting on their side. For the most part, it's not so much about creating a revolutionary gameplay mechanic as it is deciding how the player will use it. One of the reasons experienced gamers are able to catch on to a video game's gameplay is because in many cases, games are very similar to each other even on the surface. If you frequently play games like Gears of War, aside from a few minor differences, a duck and cover system comes naturally to you. If a game has that feature, it doesn't take long for you to catch on because you've experienced that particular gameplay mechanic before. The question is, how will the gameplay mechanic translate into entertaining gameplay? Take for example shooting. An experienced player will study a shooting mechanic and everything related to it. For example, will the player be able to shoot from cover? Will the player be able to stay in cover while going around sharp corners? Can the player roll from one cover location to another? And will the player be able to shoot while on the run? These are just a few examples of what an experienced player would be looking for. The reason the player knows to look for these things is because he or she has seen them countless times in many other games before. If a game doesn't have a duck and cover system, then we know how to proceed in the game going forward. While at times it does happen, it is a rare occasion when a development team can introduce something that we as players have never seen. The intent here is not to say there are no revolutionary games. In fact, the most recent revolutionary game, Death Stranding, proves that for many gamers, a revolutionary game doesn't automatically equal a great game. Say what you will about Death Stranding, it is a game that's not like many others. If nothing else, it is revolutionary in its overall design. I've even seen the game described as a visionary masterpiece. It wasn't necessarily the gameplay mechanics so much as it was the way they were implemented that made the game such a novelty. And that's just the point. Because of its revolutionary gameplay design, a great number of gamers were turned off by it. Many of the credible YouTubers that reviewed the game and enjoyed it personally stated that the game wasn't for everyone. I personally am enjoying the game on the Steam Deck, but I had a bit of an advantage because I knew what I was walking into. Obviously, Bethesda's intent for Starfield is to have broad appeal. It is my hope that the studio will focus on creating a fantastic story, side missions, and great gameplay mechanics backed by top-tier animations. The story will tell us what is expected of us as players to win the game. All of the other elements discussed in this video, if done right, will make playing the game fun. And the industry has proven time and time again, a game doesn't need to be revolutionary to achieve that. Okay guys, we're going to go ahead and end it right there. Hey look, if you liked the video, please like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, as usual, stay safe.